Hello, welcome. This is the third episode of the Burnt Out podcast. I'm here with my classmate Jeffrey. Say hi, Jeffrey.
Hello there.
And this episode's gonna be a little bit different from normal. We are going to be covering a specific crime case, rather than like just having a simple discussion. We're actually going to be like taking you guys through a full court and criminal case, and talking a little bit about the things that like caused this to happen, or theoretically caused this to happen. There's no concrete things here, as we know in sociology. Um, I think we're just gonna jump right in, start talking. We have a lot of stuff to cover, but hopefully you guys enjoy. Um, yeah, I think we're just gonna go in. All right. So I start at the beginning. We're gonna be covering uh, John Dillinger. He was uh, born in uh, 1903 in Indiana and was probably one of the most famous bank robbers in U.S. history. He was specifically known for a series of robberies and escapes from prison from in the over the course of a year between 1933 and 1934. Um, he was born and raised in Indianapolis. When he was young, his mother passed away, and although his father remarried, there was documented strain between him and his new stepmother. John dropped out of school at 16, and started working out in the city. He was also engaging in a lot of deviant behavior, as we could say. He was drinking, smoking, partaking in fairly sexual activities, and
Yeah,
this caused his father to move them out uh, to Monroeville or Mooresville, sorry, in 1920.
so to continue on, he in 1923, he tried to join the Navy, which was an effort to kind of change his lifestyle, but it was not a good fit for him, and this can be seen by him trying to desert in Boston only after 5 months of joining. After deserting, he returned to Indiana, and he decided to marry 60-year-old Burley Hovis at the age of 20. So once he got married, Dillinger had zero luck finding work. He became a pool shark. Or he joined the pool shark and Singleton, excuse me, uh, in order to try to like make that easy money that was unconventional. And eventually, in September of 1924, they decided to rob a Mooresville grocer, but were apprehended by police. And uh, the grocer was not severely hurt, but he Dillinger beat him with a cloth wrapped iron belt.
Yeah, and the his partner in crime, Singleton, ended up escaping the scene of the crime with a car and left Dillinger to be arrested by the police. He also left him high and dry in terms of sentencing, where uh, Dillinger was really sternly advised by his father to plead guilty and accept all of the charges that were put against him, while Singleton's lawyer got him a highly reduced set of charges and was only sentenced to a 2 to 14-year sentence, and ended up only serving 2 of those 14 years, while Dillinger was given the maximum penalty of 10 to 20 years and served 8.5 of those before getting out on good behavior.
So in May 10 of 1933, this was 4 years after the Great Depression had started. Dillinger, who became known as Jackrabbit, was paroled after serving 8.5 years of his sentence. Right after being paroled, Dillinger decided to rob a bank in Bluffton, Ohio, and the police arrested him on September 22nd. So about 5 months, or less than a few months after he was paroled, and he was put in county jail in Lima, Ohio, to await his trial. But while he was in custody, plans for a prison break were discovered, but nothing. The police didn't do anything with these plans. And 4 days after he was arrested, Dillinger's associates helped him escape from Indiana State Prison using shotguns and rifles they had smuggled into the prison. And during their escape, they shot two guards. Uh, this is when they just realized that the plans were actually the ones that Dillinger used to escape from prison.
And then the Dillinger and the three other escaped prisoners. Oh, sorry. They all left and eventually started their reign of terror by going around and beginning to rob a multitude of various banks across the Midwest. Uh, there were a couple different times where Dillinger was taken into custody and broken out by either himself or his associates. Um, Most notably, in March on March 3rd, 1934, Dillinger was able to escape uh, using a wooden pistol that he had whittled. It's not entirely sure whether or not this was actually true, but there's not a there's not really a better explanation on record as to how he was able to intimidate guards and force them into his own cell before locking them in and leaving. Um, there were also points where they killed police officers. They crossed state lines, which got the FBI involved, and for a really long time they were on the run from the FBI and put on the most wanted list. Um, these,
Uh,
yeah, go ahead.
Dillinger and his gang also, throughout the course of their escape slash just run from custody, would actually start to raid low level police stations and their gun arsenals, and they managed to steal many machine guns, rifles, and revolvers, with a lot of ammunition and bulletproof vests from these police stations.
Yeah, and this around in total, Dillinger and his gang racked up about uh, more than $300,000, which in today's money is equivalent to about 6.9 million. Uh, there were multiple banks that he robbed. There's not a full concrete list, but just to name a few, there was the commercial bank in Danville, Indiana, the Buffington Bank in Buffington, Ohio, the Massachusetts Avenue State Bank in Indianapolis, the Central National Bank and Trust in Greencastle, Indiana, American Bank Trust and Co. in Raccoon, Wisconsin, and the list goes on. Dillinger's reign of terror, so to say, did not stop until he was caught and, well, rather, until there was a huge bounty placed upon his head, and that was when he discovered that not all of his friends were true friends. Uh,
Yes. So,
yeah,
uh, his notorious criminal activities with his gang, as well as crossing multiple state lines, put him as public enemy number one and put him at the top of the FBI's most wanted list. And so this obviously made headlines, and there was a $10,000 reward on his head. And eventually, uh, a friend of Dillinger's girlfriend at the time, who was a legal immigrant working at a brothel, uh, tipped off the police, and she told the FBI that if she helped them, they should prevent her from getting deported. And she essentially allowed the FBI to find that Dillinger, his girlfriend, and uh, Anna Sage, which was the person who reported Dillinger to the police, were going to attend a theater outside of Chicago, and that armed agents should wait for them to come out while Anna would give them a signal.
Anna wore an orange skirt, and once she uh, left the theater, that was the FBI's signal to go in and attempt to take in Dillinger for one final time. Um, Unfortunately, though, Dillinger did end up sensing that there was something wrong, and he did understand that there was a setup. And after sprinting into an alley and getting into a standoff with officers, he was fatally shot in that alley and died. Um, his death was infamous and widely reported across the nation. It's believed that 15,000 people ended up showing up to his funeral. Many people stopped by the mortuary where he was kept, where his body was being kept, to see if it was truly him that was shot. Even now, there are still conspiracy theories that think that he survived that encounter somehow, and that he wasn't in fact the person that was shot or the body that was buried under his headstone. There's a lot of other conspiracy theories about like Dillinger undergoing some kind of plastic surgery or various other methods to change his appearance in which the FBI were not aware of. So some people still don't believe that he ever was truly caught, but according to the government and their fingerprints and all their other evidence, they definitely got the right guy. Um,
Yes. So essentially, in the long run, Dillinger was able to escape custody, whether it be prison or escape police raids, three whole times, and he was able to commit multiple robberies, which gave him a lot of money, but in the end didn't really help him.
yeah, he was. His nickname Jackrabbit was due to his uh, first his ability to escape such prisons that were deemed impossible to escape from, as well as like his ability to evade police, uh, both in just his physicality. It was stated that he could very lightly jump over many different obstacles, much like a rabbit, which coined his name. But he remained very impossible to catch for
Very
quite a long
elusive,
time.
very elusive.
He was very elusive
Yes,
up until his luck finally ran out.
hilarious.
So now we're gonna start talking about the sociological theories. Um, we will go over them briefly to allow anyone who might not know what these theories are just a bit of background, and then we'll connect them to the greater context of this case, just to allow for some uh, additional understanding for those who aren't super involved in sociological theories.
So to start, we applied strain theory to this. So for those who don't know, strain theory was developed by Robert K. Merton, and essentially it's when societal norms or socially accepted goals place pressure onto an individual or a group of people in order to make them conform to this idea of society. And it basically makes the individual work within society itself, or if they don't, they're engaged in what is strained and lead to deviant behavior. And so you have different areas, which is conformity, innovation, ritualism, retreatism, and finally rebellion. So conformity is when someone both accepts the institutional needs and the cultural goals. This is what society deems as normal. A normal person who just leads a normal life. They follow the rules, they follow the goals of society, and they don't deviate from that. Innovation is when the cultural goals are accepted, but the institutional needs are rejected. And this, in a sense, is when people try to find other ways of getting where they want to be, but since they don't have because they don't have the options available to them, but they still want that cultural aspect. They still want that end goal that society is like you should get here. Uh, you have ritualism, which is when you accept the means but you don't accept cultural goals. And this idea is when you have these options available to you to try and get to try and get where society wants you to, but you just don't accept what society says or what society believes you should be doing. And then you have retreatism, which is where you just people reject the cultural goals, but they also don't have these institutional means, so they're not able to go really anywhere. And then the outlier is rebellion. This is where people develop new means and new goals to their establishment, so they believe that the cultural goals aren't real, but they still have their own goals, and the means provided by society or the institution don't work, so they use their own ways in order to get where they want to be.
And in referring to goals and means, uh, a majority of time when we're looking at America and the United States in general, the goal is either like the American dream or to succeed financially or something along that line that is like constantly and significantly pushed by everyone else in the society. So that could even be like getting a college degree in order to get a quote unquote better job. And the means by that are usually like, if we're talking about conformity, that would be like going to college, getting a degree, and then getting a new job or getting a job that pays well. Uh, and there are various other things that the other types of the deviants will do in order to achieve these goals or reject these goals. Um, when talking about Dillinger, he was more of an innovator in he where he wanted to be successful. He wanted to make his father proud, uh, even despite the fact that he knew that his father would be disappointed in him for engaging in such criminal activity. He still went along to rob banks, kill people, escape from jail, avoid arrest, and just generally engage in significant criminal activity. Um, but it was all for the sake of becoming financially well off. um,
Yeah,
and uh, we see that we see that in his childhood he also had like a history of criminal behavior. Um, not nearly to the extent that he did in his adulthood, but in his childhood he did engage in gang activity to a very small degree. And then when things got tough and the Great Depression happened, it only exacerbated his uh, need to
situation.
achieve.
Yeah, I definitely think if we're talking about how this applies, the definitely innovation is the main idea.
Mm.
You could apply rebellion, but I feel like innovation is more because he's still stuck to what society kind of viewed of being this like wealthy class individual that has money that lives like this normal life, and he through bank robberies were like trying to get there. However, through the killings of multiple police officers and others, he kind of went out to a far end, and definitely the Great Depression pushed him to that end. You see that during the Great Depression, many people lost their homes, lost their money, were poor, starving, and that it's all those are institutional means that are just cut off. And so not a lot of people have them anymore, and that left him with little options. Since he was already engaged in previous criminal activity and deviant behavior with other people that have already started to reinforce this behavior, he goes into this even deeper stage of innovation where he's like, "Hey, I can keep doing this because I've already come this far. I'm trying to get here. I'm trying to become wealthy, and the only way to do that because I can't get a job is to rob banks."
Yeah, at some point it is definitely applicable to say that, or it's definitely acceptable to say that at some point within his robbery and his criminal activity, there was a sunk cost fallacy being applied where he was so far in that he probably was like, well, I'm here. I can't really turn back now. Uh, and that
I
probably
think that
happened
point.
somewhere after like the one of the first murders.
I think definitely he understood that point as soon as he was put on top of the FBI's most wanted list.
Mm-hmm.
Because as soon as he reached that point, you know, he knows for a fact that once the FBI is on him, and once he's reached that highest point of who was wanted, he can't go back. He can only push forward until he either lives out a life in without danger or he dies. And the latter happened.
Mm-hmm. And it should be mentioned that like Merton strain theory can't like be only applied to an individual. It's meant more for like a general group, but in simplified terms, it is a little bit easier to apply this kind of deviance typology to individuals because it's easier to understand the means and goals and the differences between the different types. Um, and that'll take us into our next two theories. These are directly related to each other. One builds upon the other. Differential association theory, which was developed by Edwin Sutherland, it inherently proposes that through interactions with others, individuals learn the values, attitudes, techniques, and motives for criminal behavior. So it's kind of like monkey see, monkey do, where someone, if they are engaged, if they are even like in proximity to criminal activity and they have any kind of motivation to involve themselves within it, they will take the steps to learn um, either how to engage in the criminal activity, what it means to engage in this activity, and how they might change it or modify it to better benefit themselves. And there are various like evolutions of this theory. The differential reinforcement theory was evolved out of this differential association theory by C.R. Jeffrey. Um, he called out the failure of Sutherland's model because it failed to include the concept that people can be conditioned through a reinforcement method to follow certain behavior patterns and even commit certain actions because of that reinforcement model.
So if we're gonna look at differential association theory, I think the best place to start with that is his early life because, as we explained before, when he was in the city before they moved to Mooresville, uh, he would stay out at night. He would drink. He would purchase sex workers and just live that nightlife that many people see in the city that is very deviant. And I feel like him doing that, he definitely was around that crowd, and that kind of reinforced his deviant behavior. That let him continue on. It kind of got him hooked into there. And his father, which was good on his father, tried to get him away from that by moving him out of that area, tried to get him away from that differential association and try to move him into a better area, but that didn't work, as you can see by his later behavior. You can also see uh, his, when I say his, sorry, I mean Dillinger. You can see his attempt at trying to use differential association theory to benefit himself. That's mostly you see by him trying to join the Navy. But I feel that that idea of deviant behavior kind of reinforce was too much reinforced as a child that he couldn't take the discipline or the kind of orders that were given to him in the Navy, which led him to be deserted, and he didn't get much differential reinforcement from that, or differential association from that.
Yeah. A lot of his childhood, like his father specifically, was had a huge impact on his life, as his father was reported to be very hot and cold when it came to his behavior towards his son. He could be extremely abusive at times, and then in the next moment be incredibly loving and permissive. Um, and probably this probably drove Dillinger to not feel safe within particular structured institutions, seeing as he dropped out of school really, really early on. And although he tried to keep a job in the city, he ended up abandoning that for an attempt at quick cash through the grocer robbery with with Singleton. And as Jeffrey mentioned, he dropped out of the Navy after only 5 months, and went AWOL in as soon as they landed in a port, only to return back to Indiana and continue his criminal behavior. Um, we see that in while he was first imprisoned, he was taught by inmates who were seasoned robbers of banks. He was taught their methods and all their skills and how to perfect bank robbing. And as soon as he was released from prison on parole, he immediately started to engage in that activity and exhibit and perform that behavior to a very successful degree. So he saw success in repeating the behaviors that he was taught, and because of that success, he continued to do so until it led to his death about a year later.
Yeah, I think if you definitely look at how, as a kid, he again uh tried to join that nightlife. I feel like you look at that, you can see that that's the only place he felt, in a word, safe or able to express his free self. He couldn't do it at school. That's why he dropped out of school. Couldn't do it in the Navy. That's why he dropped out of the Navy. His father wouldn't allow. His father tried to mold him into something different than what he wanted to be, and the only place that he found him where he saw himself was with other criminals, or especially when he went to jail, these other bank robbers that especially influenced him because he's like, I see myself in them, therefore I should do the same, and then kind of went on to become that person that people associated with. He became that person that people would break out with, that people would try to help escape, that would rob banks with. And so definitely while he was associated to someone else, people would start to become associated to him in that negative lifestyle.
And due to his notoriety across the nation, I mean, hundreds of newspapers were printing various headlines about Dillinger and how he was almost attributed as a Robin Hood type, because again, this did occur during the Great Depression, um, or at least right after the like main spike. So people were still experiencing great amounts of poverty uh, throughout the nation, and seeing someone come from humble beginnings, let's say, to being this uh, almost like anti-hero in that he's robbing the banks and presumably distributing the money in some way. He was often lofted as some kind of Robin Hood or anti-hero by the public, and that only served to bolster his confidence in what he was doing, uh, and led him and his group to do bigger jobs and attempt to do more and more and more, until they eventually got caught the eye of the FBI, and that's about where his criminal career started to take a tailspin.
And if you also want to talk about uh, with this applies to both differential association and differential reinforcement theory. Uh, people, there were people who encouraged him. As we said before, tons of people showed up to his funeral, which you're not really going to do that if you're not family or anything of that sort. You usually do that if you are in solidarity with this person. And there's definitely a bunch of people that emulated his behavior, thought it was amazing, and encouraged him to continue it. And when you see both of those people on the criminal end of the spectrum who are encouraging you, and then them on the opposite side who are like those innocent people that are just like, yeah, keep doing what you're doing, that really pushes you to be like, yeah, what I'm doing is right. I should continue doing it.
Yeah. And with that, we'll move on to our final theory, which is Reckless's containment theory. This has to do with how your inner, let's say, like identification of yourself versus the outer identification of yourself interact with one another, and how the various social factors, whether it's um, your immediate family, your friends, um, institutions that you attend or engage in, how they push and pull on your sense of self, and how those ties specifically inhibit one from engaging in significant criminal activity. It's generally, to generalize this, it's the emphasis and importance of having a structured and secure uh, social net, and support network. And we can see that Dillinger was very adverse to engaging in a lot of really structured social organizations and institutions, as we saw that he's dropped out of school, he dropped out of the Navy, he did
Yeah.
not engage in a
Uh,
lot of significant, like, normal, quote unquote, normal career paths.
he had a lot of group reinforcement from those criminals he was committing those crimes with. He was alone, it'd probably be a little less easier than it was to commit these crimes. But as he was with a gang of people that followed his ideas, he was able to continue this like reckless behavior that eventually led him to be killed. And you also, of course, like we said before, have poverty looming over his head because of the Great Depression, looming over many people's heads. And with him unable to ever secure a job, that really pushed him. That societal pressure really pushed him to continue committing his crimes.
Yeah. And so now we're kind of going to discuss on, like, what, learning about this case and knowing what we know, what can we do to prevent or at least inhibit another John Dillinger from happening, so to say.
So, so Grace, do you want to start us out with this?
Yeah. So, when looking at John Dillinger's case and understanding his background and all of the various social factors that led up to his engagement in deviant behavior, I think it is not out of left field to say that making sure that young individuals have a very strong sense of connection to their community is incredibly important when it comes to preventing juveniles from engaging in criminal behavior. We see that John had an extremely rough home life, and if someone had been clued into that, or if, like, his teachers or his friends, before he moved straight into criminal activity, if any of them had spoken to John or tried and helped him engage in his potential, uh, as he was a very intelligent and talented man. He excelled in everything that he applied himself to, and unfortunately, what he most applied himself to was criminal behavior. But if he had had that more concrete support system, I think that potentially his criminal activity would have lessened significantly.
One
Uh,
major factor I think is, yes, people have to look at is the time he was born and the time he lived in. Of course, we talked about the Great Depression, but you also have the fact that these are the eras of World War One, especially that he was born into, and this is a time when many many family traditions were really religiously based, or you had a lot of cultural aspects that come from derived from these religious ideas and ideations, and especially at this time, there wasn't people viewed mental health or this like deviant recklessness as either just like ill mannered. Sometimes it can be some people would blame it on like possession or like by a demon, and no one really wanted to help. You just see this and you just let it be because at the time it was you deal with yourself, your family is your own issue. It's the father that has to deal with it. It's not outside resources.
mhm.
And I feel like that's really big to call to action because today that idea has lessened a lot, but it still remains the fact that people don't think they should become involved in a child's welfare, even though if we can start to interact to try and help these children if they're not in a good household or they're starting to go into a different harsh lifestyle to try to help them in order so that they can come back to this middle spectrum and have to realize, hey, I have something to offer society. And what I can offer or what I can do may be able to benefit others. And instead of working their way into that lifestyle that leads to crimes and murder.
Yeah, I think considering the social context is incredibly important within this case, as Jeffrey said. Um, there wasn't just a stigma against mental health and uh, mental illnesses. There was rather a disbelief and a rejection that those even were a concept or any kind of actual concrete thing at that time. Um, there were no true ideas of like what consisted of like mental health crises or um, support systems like we have now.
Yeah, at this time, if you had mental health, you were said if you were like depressed or had some type of mental illness, you were sent to an institution where you would be tested, and sometimes they would give you lobotomies to literally try and change that like uh hormonal aspect of you to become quote unquote normal again. But there was no, hey, we're gonna sit down with you and talk about this. It was more all action, and that action wasn't good.
Mm-hmm. There was no proactiveness. It was rather a response to something after it had happened. There was very little support in general from uh, anyone who there was little to no support for anyone who was experiencing any kind of mental health crisis or a mental health issue, which is extremely unfortunate. And now we have access to resources that can help us with that, but there are still people who do not have access to those resources. They are either behind a price tag or behind a social stigma. There's still a lot of negativity associated with getting help when it comes to your mental health, especially in more rural areas or more religious areas. Um, those ideas are still rejected by a significant portion of the population across the United States, I would say.
Yes. And to move on to our next call to action is really this idea of how a parents need to realize how much of an influence they can be on their children, or how their actions can show to a lot of children what lifestyles are. And this, a lot of people already know, but I don't think a lot of people understand how far out it can reach. So this idea comes to a lot of things of the nature versus nurture idea. for those who don't know, nature versus nurture is the idea that people believe that some people are just born to be criminals, that it's in their nature to just be born, and that it's in their DNA that they're going to become criminals and do these criminal activities. While a lot of others and more beliefs have shown that it's more a nurture kind of idea where they're kind of taught these behaviors. And it's if they're nurtured well, if they're given the resources available, if they're allowed to be expressed, then they can start to become what society wants them, or in the sense, be not go into this deviant aspect realm where they're committing these behaviors. But if it's on the opposite end where you're nurtured, you're not really taken care of, you're not being healthy, it can lead you down a deviant behavior path, which can sometimes lead, in the case of Dillinger, to very negative outcomes.
Yeah, and there's also a significant amount in this case. There's also a significant amount of, I would say, negligence from the law enforcement.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Considering that Dillinger was found with plans that detailed how to break out of prison, and the police had those plans and proceeded to dismiss them and did nothing with them. They didn't use those to prepare for anything, and this was primarily because Dillinger claimed he had nothing to do with those and he had no idea what they were. But the law enforcement very early on did identify those as escape plans and proceeded to not do anything to bolster protection or prepare themselves for a potential plan because that plan was carried out not even 4 days later and was successful, which is laughable considering that that particular prison was lauded as something that was impossible to escape from.
And another thing, especially with police tactics, that needs to be addressed here is just their strategics and their safety that they didn't really implement. And again, this is in the early 1900s where it was more of just go. It was more of a cowboyish style where you go get him, and that was it. That was your plan. You would go out there, catch the guy, and there wasn't really a lot behind that. But you can see in this how that really failed a lot, especially again with that prison break, but also with a raid the FBI tried to do on Dillinger's associates. So at one point in, I believe it was the state of, yes, the state of Wisconsin, FBI tried to uh, go out to this lodge in the little BLB Lodge. And essentially, what they were going to do is surround the building and capture Dillinger and one of his associates. However, uh, the associates and Dillinger noticed the FBI first and started engaging in a gun battle in a firefight, in which two FBI agents died and Dillinger was able to escape. And in the chaos, they found that there were women, uh, three women inside the lodge that were almost killed by gunshots, while Dillinger and his associates fled out before the agents could surround the house. You also had the example of the raid at the movie theater, where their plan was to literally just go out and capture him, wait for him to exit, get the signal, and then go up to him and capture him. And as you can see, Dillinger tried to escape, shot them. They shot Dillinger. Dillinger died. But that really put a lot of civilians in danger. That put those hit Dillinger's girlfriend and Anna, who was the witness, or excuse me, who was the tip to the FBI, the person who helped the FBI catch Dillinger. That put them in danger. They both put them in direct line of fire. And while police strategy and strategics have grown a lot, especially you can see it with raids are more well planned, there's still a lot of danger that needs to be learned about civilians in the area, especially when operating with firearms.
We also see a lot of negligence when it comes to additionally some of his escapes from prison. Uh, when he was arrested in Lima and jailed, they the oh they had some escaped prisoners come in and attempt to impersonate Indiana law enforcement to try and pretend that there's a transfer from the Lima prison to a state prison in Indiana, and these these escapees were armed, and they once upon the sheriff asking them for credentials, the sheriff was shot and killed, as well as the rest of the rest of the inhabitants of that particular office, including the sheriff's wife and the deputy, were locked in a cell, and the entire place uh, was able to be shut down by three men. And then Dillinger, once he was released from his cell, uh, we also had Dillinger and his gang plunder several different police arsenals, which speaks to the lack of security of those particular arsenals, in which they were able to acquire machine guns, rifles, revolvers, a lot of ammunition, and bulletproof vests. If there was either enough security or enough vigilance, hopefully that would have never have happened in the first place. But those tools enabled these men to continue committing various amounts of crimes, and continue to rob uh, countless different banks across the Midwest for an extended amount of time.
I really think that in terms of security, especially like if you're talking about the security of those police weaponry, we've come a long way, but
Mm-hmm.
it's still a threat, especially if someone were to get into those and access those weapons. But I think, at least in society, we've come a long way, but there's still a lot to go in the sense of how we provide both security in the ways we provide it and also those who use it. So security of law enforcement, but also security to the civilian population.
Yeah, like uh, I will say that I am a pretty uh, large proponent for gun control. And when it comes to looking at what Dillinger and his gang were able to just steal straight up from the police, it's kind of amazing that the police even had machine guns like on hand, uh, especially considering that a majority of law enforcement are not meant to be like. I found it crazy that they had machine guns in the police stations or whatever
I
police
think
or law enforcement location that they stole these from.
I think today you that definitely like isn't really acceptable. There isn't really a huge need. Obviously, you have your special teams that have
Mm-hmm.
those high power weapons, but in normal little town police stations, you're not going to have a huge arsenal. However, I think at the time of this is really the notorious like gang era where you
Mm-hmm.
have a bunch of criminal gangs that the mafia and all these different organizations that are committing these crimes, and they have their own source of firepower. And I think it's logical that at the time the police had these weapons, especially because again, this is the era of World War I and the Great Depression, where really these firepowers were becoming stocked so that way they could be used in case of warfare. But I think they just were not secure. They weren't
Yeah,
really taken care of well, and that's allowed a lot of danger to the police and the society because Dillinger was just able to go in with his associates and take him
yeah,
just from the police.
yeah. And I feel like a lot of this also speaks to like the unpreparedness of various law enforcement. Not that it's entirely their
Yeah,
fault to not fully expect an entire gang of criminals to come down and essentially rob them, but there were multiple instances within Dillinger's escapades in which the police could have done a little bit more, or at least have had a little more. I forget the word, but I feel like there could have been a little bit more done to ensure the safety of both the officers and civilians that were
More due
involved.
diligence.
More due diligence, yeah. Which we, of course, in modern days, we see have come a long way. Although I would say that we still have issues with police and their due diligence. Um,
And definitely safety to those around. Police
mhm,
definitely are trained to try to be safe, especially when operating with a firearm around uh, civilians. But it's really hard when you have one police officer in a crowded area of hundreds of regular people and one criminal.
mhm,
So definitely, there still needs to be more training in that aspect.
yes. Um,
Uh, do you have anything else to add for call actions, Grace?
I mean, I think we covered pretty much everything. We covered support systems, mental health support.
Nature
Uh,
versus nurture, and a parent's influence on a child.
mhm. Yeah, I think we covered about everything. Do you have any other comments you'd want to make?
I think just this case really shows uh, just how prolific someone who's pushed by both ends, both the criminal ends of society and the normal societal ends of just regular people, how when pushed from both ends that could lead you just to be the absolute extreme where you're top of the FBI's most wanted, you're just doing everything you can, or not everything you could, but everything that you want to just to stay notorious and not be caught, but while also garnering attention from the law enforcement.
Yeah, I think this case is a very good example of how far someone would be willing to go to achieve the goals set out by both himself and society, but generally, like, what it means to like succeed, and how it relates, how everything is really just tied to that need of money,
Yeah.
and it can lead you to do a lot of different things.
And the final thing I want to add is just I also like this case because it really shows how every criminal will start somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
With Dillinger, he started with sex workers and alcohol in the city late night, and how that might be small. People might think those as petty crimes or petty deviant behavior, but in the long run, it can possibly, not everyone, but it could turn out worst case scenario, and that's why we gotta look out for this. That's why we gotta be able to take care of each other and make sure that, hey, are these people doing really something deviant or something that can negatively influence their lifestyle? And how do we pull them back in and try to help not, I won't say rehabilitate, but provide
Reorient.
access to reorient, yes, reorient them into a way that they could go out and become something that is influential to society in a positive aspect.
Yeah, I definitely think that there needs to be more of a understanding that well, first of all, engaging in deviant behavior is not inherently bad or negative,
No, no,
but
no, no.
there is always a, I guess we can refer to it as like a slippery slope, in which when you begin to engage in deviant behavior for a need, like financial reasons, whether that's to provide shelter for yourself or someone else, or food, or general safety and security, we need to be aware that like there are motives behind what these people are doing, and we need to understand those motives in order to help them. We can't just jump up and say that they're engaging in this activity because they're immoral or because they are somehow evil, or whatever someone might say about someone who's engaging in criminal activity. Though there is always a reason behind someone's actions, and we cannot fully understand based solely on assumption. There are always
You,
multiple factors at play.
yeah, and I feel like definitely be able to provide those resources either to parents to look out for it or provide access to resources for families to help their children just be able to identify these aspects and say, hey, uh, are we able to counter this? And is it needed to be countered? And how can we counter it?
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, and that's a huge sticking point in criminology in the first place, is to identify these various factors and try and see how we can affect them.
prevent crime.
Yeah, and prevent crime and prevent people from having to result to crime in order to just live.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, I think with that ending statement, we'll end the episode. Uh, thank thank you everyone for coming in and watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Um, yeah, I mean, if I encourage everyone to read up on this case, we didn't get to cover every single detail, but it is a very interesting case. There's a lot of stuff that this guy did in the course of a year, which I'm kind of impressed by. I won't lie.
Yes. So definitely interesting case. Has some aspects you'll laugh at, and some aspects you'll just be like, how is that even possible?
Hmm.
So definitely recommend read.
Yeah. And with that, we'll see you later. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye, guys.